Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 278 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is distractions. Our quote of the day comes to us from Robin Sharma. An addiction to distraction is the end of your creative production. I really enjoyed recording today's episode. In a time where technological advances are distracting us almost by the second, I'm really glad that we were able to speak with Nir Eyal. I challenge you right now to try and eliminate those distractions and give this podcast your full attention. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Nir, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
I am ready to bring it.
It is brought. So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you have either a no-quit story yourself or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up and given in, but you didn't.
See, I have endless stories like this in so many various facets of my life, big and small. I mean, I've started 2 tech companies, and let me tell you, they were a slog. There were so many days that I was just ready to throw in the towel with my business. But I probably think that's a common story for any entrepreneur. I think the things I'm most proud of in terms of not throwing in the towel have to do with the very pedantic day-to-day life affairs, like being with my daughter. You know, there's so many things that are required when you're a dad that it's, oftentimes really easy to lose your patience. We all, or at least I like to think of myself as being a great dad, but I'll be totally honest with you. Sometimes there are, occasions when I am boiling inside. And so when I can just cool it down and kind of reset to my best self and respond in a way that I would hope my parents would have responded to me, and to kind of set that example for my daughter, that's the times when I'm most proud of myself.
I think that's really important, and I commend you for sharing that, because I am a father of 3 young kids myself, and I think it's a challenge within itself. And I feel that so many people throughout social media and different platforms put forth this image of perfection, and everything is perfect all the time. And the reality is, like you said, it's those important times, but those times you get tested where you need to take that 3 or 4 seconds and say, okay, I gotta be here. So
Yep.
I appreciate you touching on it, because like I said, it's important to be real and to be vulnerable. So got to ask you if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I'm what you call a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services to help people build healthy habits in their lives. And so I wrote a book from a class I taught at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business there a few years ago. The book was called Hooked, and it's been used by companies in pretty much every industry. I've worked with media companies like the New York Times to get people hooked to reading the news. I've worked with healthcare companies to get people hooked to taking a particular their dosage of medication or using a medical device. Or I've worked with companies like Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, to get kids hooked onto in-classroom learning. Fitbod is a company that uses the hooked model to get people hooked to exercising in the gym. So all kinds of products can be used to help people form good habits in their lives. And then more recently, I decided to look at the other side of the equation. If Hooked was about how to build good habits, I wrote this latest book, Indistractable, which is all about how to break the bad habits in our life.
So I love the 2 books, and I love the concepts behind them. I want to jump back to the first one you mentioned is the book you spoke about, and the topic of habits, and it's something that I think is fascinating. I'm curious if you wouldn't mind just briefly touching on, I guess, the importance of habits and how you maybe guide people to create those positive habits in their life.
Yeah, so the book is not so much for individuals, it's more for product companies. For changing a habit, for starting a new habit in your life, it's not that complicated actually. It's been several books. My friend James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits, which I'm sure many folks have read.
Great book.
Charles Duhigg wrote a book called The Power of Habit, and it's the same basic loop of a cue, a response, and then some kind of reward. When it comes to product design, however, it's more complicated. But of course, the benefits can scale. So you're not trying to change your life. You're trying to change the lives of millions of people, hopefully through using your product to help them, live healthier lives, happier, more connected lives by changing their habits. And so the model I propose is called the hooked model. And it's basically these 4 steps of a trigger. There are 2 types of triggers. We have what's called an external trigger and an internal trigger. Then you've got an action. And then you've got the reward, which is typically a variable reward. There's some kind of uncertainty there. And then finally, there's an investment where the user puts something into the product to make it better and better with use. And this is where technology can play such an incredible role in changing our habits, because not only do we use these products so frequently, but the fact that we can invest in them with data, content, followers, reputation, means that for the first time, these products are being custom made on a per user level. So it used to be, Henry Ford is credited with saying that you can have any color of Model T as long as it's black. Well, why did he say that, right? He said that because it was really hard for him to retool his factory to make different color cars. Well, fast forward to today, where everyone can get their own version of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. All these products are custom built for you by you because of the investment you make in the products themselves. Not just with your money, of course, but with your data, content, reputation, skill, all of these things customize the product. So if you were to log in to one of my accounts, it actually wouldn't be very useful or interesting to you, because it's been tailored to my needs. And so it's through these 4 steps of the hook model that these tastes and preferences are formed and that these habits take hold.
I think it's really interesting how you touched on that, and obviously you talk about it from a perspective of a product or a company. And I think it's really interesting, the perspective of social media, because I think that's one of the things that we talk about quite often, and I think people miss, is you have the ability to mute or turn off those things that you don't want to see, and obviously you can turn on or follow those things that you do want. So I want to jump to your most recent book, and I got to ask a little bit of a different concept and idea from Hooked, but what got you into not only the idea of writing it, but going ahead and taking care of it and actually going forward and putting the second book out?
Yeah, so for me, it was a very personal problem that for me, I really needed to reassess my own relationship with distraction. There was one seminal moment in my life when I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this book of activities that daddies and daughters could do together. And one of the activities in this book was to ask each other this question, that if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I wish I could tell you what my daughter said in that moment, but I can't, because I decided for some reason that whatever was on my phone was more important and interesting than she was. And I was checking something on my device. And so she got the message and left the room and decided to play with some toy outside. And by the time I looked up from my screen, she was gone. And so I decided then and there that I really had to reassess my relationship with distraction. So my knee-jerk reaction was to blame the technology, right? That it must be these screens doing it to me. These big bad tech companies are doing it to me. But the more I researched and tried the techniques, you see so many books these days by these Chicken Little tech critics who say the sky is falling and we should all get rid of our technology and the technology is hijacking our brain. They're all written by professors who don't have social media accounts. And so when I tried to do these things, I got rid of my smartphone and I got myself a flip phone, the kind with no apps. And then I got myself a word processor with no internet connection so that I could finally focus and do my work. And I still got distracted. I would look at my bookshelf and say, oh, you know what? I should probably read that book I've been meaning to do some research in. Or, I probably should clean up my desk, or let me just take out the trash. And I kept getting distracted, because it turns out that distraction is much more nuanced than people think. It's not about the device in your hand. It's about what's going on inside of you. that distraction always begins from within. And it's this exploration into the deeper psychology of distraction that I think is so imperative, because not only do we need these skills, if you want to excel at your job, if you want to have close relationships, if you want to raise your kids properly, you have got to know how to be indistractable, how to live with personal integrity, and simply do whatever it is you say you're going to do with your time, your attention, and your life.
So I got to ask a follow-up question for that. Is there a skill or two, or do you have a suggestion for people that they can try to begin implementing those things to not become so easily distracted?
Well, that's what Indistractable is all about. So it's not so much about the tactics. There's tons and tons of tactics, and I'll give you a link in the show notes where you can get more tactics than you can ever implement. And it's not about the quick fixes. We need to stop looking for the silver bullets, because it starts with the fact that it's not about the stupid technology. People have been distracted for a very long time. Plato talked about this problem 2,500 years before the iPhone. He called it akrasia, the tendency that we all have to do things against our better interest. It's in scripture. It's all over the place in ancient texts. People have always struggled with distraction. So we need to stop looking for the hacks, and we need to ask ourselves, why do we look for escape? The reason we look for escape is because of what's going on inside of us. That everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort. That the reason we look for escape, whether it's through too much news, too much booze, too much Facebook, too much whatever, is because we cannot handle our present reality in a healthy manner. And a lot of people don't want to face that fact. But when you look around at the world today, there are no shortage of companies that are happy to sell us stuff to get us out of our heads. And we need to be on guard and realize that, look, these things aren't evil. Okay, alcohol is not evil. Okay, we don't want to go back to the days of prohibition. What we need to do is to ask ourselves, are we using it to the extent where we are abusing it, where it's using us, or can we use it in a way that's helpful, right? There's nothing wrong with a glass of wine over dinner. Not everyone who has a beer at lunch is an alcoholic, but some people certainly are. And so I think we see a similar conversation happening when it comes to technology. Almost nobody is actually addicted. But for some reason, we love using this victimization language of technology is addicting us. It's hijacking your brains, because that makes us feel so much better, right? When I can blame it on a company, when I can say, oh, they're doing it to me. Now there's a pusher, there's a dealer, as opposed to calling it what it really is. It's a distraction. And distractions are something we can do something about. But of course, that means I got to do something. Ugh, that's no fun, right? It's so much easier to just blame somebody else. But it turns out that, after 5 years of research in this 250-page book, I tell you exactly step by step how to do whatever it is that you say you're going to do and fight distraction so that you can live the kind of life you want.
I'm really glad you touched on that. We've often been talking about for the past few shows about the concept and the idea of turning off technology and people talking about focusing on themselves, their family, or living in that present moment. I'm curious, do you believe in, or do you ever just turn off technology? Is that something that you subscribe to?
Sure, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as long as it's done mindfully. That I don't like these digital detoxes. I don't think they work very well. For most of us, that's just not practical, right? That if you stop using email, you're going to get fired. Right? If you stop, it's very easy for some professor without a social media account to say, but for the vast majority of us, we don't have that kind of luxury, and frankly, it doesn't work. When I used to be clinically obese, and I would go on these fad diets of, no fast food for 30 days or whatever it was. And then, of course, what happened on day 31?
Yep.
Right? I'd come back with a vengeance and eat even more because I'd been deprived, because I hadn't dealt with why I was doing things against our better interests. And so I'm all for finding time away from all sorts of distractions. So maybe this is a good time to define what it is we're talking about here. When we talk about distraction, it's really important to understand what distraction is. And the best way to do that is to understand what distraction is not. Okay. The opposite of distraction, most people will tell you the opposite of distraction is focus, but it is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. If you look at the etymology of both words, they both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And they both end in the same 6-letter word, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you to what you want to do in life, things that you do with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction. Any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that you are not doing with intent. So this is really, really important, because what a lot of people don't understand is that anything can be traction and anything can be distraction. Let me give you an example. You sit down at your desk and you say, okay, now I'm going to stop procrastinating. I'm going to do that big project that I need to do. I'm going to stop getting distracted. Here I go. I'm going to get to work. But first, let me check email. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh my God, all the time.
All the time, right? Or let me just do that one quick thing on my to-do list. That's productive, right? That's me being productive. I got to do it anyway, right? If you succumb to that, as I used to, all the time, you are letting distraction trick you. And this is why this form of distraction is so much more costly and pernicious than other types of distraction, right? If you're using Facebook or you're playing Candy Crush at your desk at work, that's pretty obvious that you're slacking off, right? You know it, everybody knows it. But if you're checking email as opposed to working on that big project, you have let distraction trick you into prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important. And that is toxic for your productivity and for your well-being. So anything that is not what you plan to do is by definition a distraction, which means that anything can be traction. There's nothing wrong with social media. There's nothing wrong with YouTube or Netflix. None of it's a problem as long as you use it on your schedule, not the media company's schedule.
I love that. I have to, full and fair disclosure, when I was in middle school and high school, whenever I had to sit down and study for a test, I would always make my room or my closet unbelievably clean, because I would just say, okay, I got to sit down and study, and all of a sudden an hour later I'm like, wow, my room is perfectly clean, and I'm like, but I haven't done a minute of studying.
Yeah, that's not something I just did in middle school. That's something I did up until about 5 years ago until I started writing this book.
So I got to ask a question that I'm always asked different authors is, so many people want to write a book and so many people think about it, and I've heard and I've interviewed some amazing authors that have said something along the lines, everybody has a book within them. What do you think the difference, or can you put your finger on the difference of people that want to do it, think about it, versus actually going ahead and doing it? And if you had one idea or suggestion for people, or possibly any of our listeners that are trying to or want to write a book, what would that one suggestion be?
Write for yourself. That writing a book because you want to have fame and fortune is just stupid. If that's your plan, you're just bad at math, because the odds are so stacked against you. Instead, what you need to do is to write because you have a problem that you are trying to sort out. That's the best reason, I think, to write a nonfiction book. I'm not talking about fiction. I don't know anything about fiction. I've never written a fiction book. But when it comes to nonfiction, it's always for me been about, I have a question that I read other books about, and they don't properly answer the question. Or I try the techniques and I realize they're rubbish. They don't work. And so that, I think, is what drives me, at least, to write my books. Because here's the thing. It's almost like when you build a startup, right? When you build a company. If you want to start a company because you want to be fabulously wealthy, again, you're just bad at math, right? The odds are crazy. But if you start a company because you think a product needs to exist in the world, you want that product to exist, well, then you can't fail. You might not make a lot of money, but that's not the point. The point is to give yourself that product that must exist. Similarly, with when it comes to writing a book. If you write a book because you think other people will like it, it's going to be torture. You're going to spin your wheels, try to figure out what other people like, what they don't like. It's stupid. Instead, if you write the book you are looking for but can't find, you can't lose. Because worst case scenario, I don't care if anybody reads my book, because this book solved my problem for me. And it took me 5 years to write because I looked through tons of academic research. I talked to hundreds of experts. I did countless interviews because I desperately wanted to know the answer to this problem. And I tried and practiced everything that's in the book. And there's a lot of stuff I tried that didn't make it into the book because it didn't work. And so I only included the stuff that not only worked for me, but also was backed by peer-reviewed studies. And if other people read that book and it helps them, well, wow, that's wonderful. That's icing on the cake. But to be totally transparent, I wrote the book for me first and foremost. And as long as it solved my problem, then I know that I couldn't have failed.
I think that's great advice, and the reason I ask that question is because it's always interesting to get different authors' perspectives, and I think you hit it on the head. And I think when you focus on doing it for you first, I think it leads to some pretty amazing things about that. So, wanted to ask you this question. I'm very curious about your answer based on how you talked about distractions and habits. I was curious if you have a morning routine that you swear by.
So the second technique that I talk about in the book, after mastering the internal triggers, which are those uncomfortable emotional states, the second thing you have to do is to make time for traction. And making time for traction is all about keeping a schedule, because here's the thing. You have no right, and I have no sympathy for anyone who tells me they got distracted when they can't tell me what they got distracted from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
If you have lots of blank white space on your calendar, you cannot say you got distracted, because by definition, you can't tell me what you got distracted from. There was nothing you had planned. So for people, 2/3 of Americans don't have any sort of a calendar. They're just walking around with lots of blank white space in their day. So of course, everything is a distraction. They're just leaving themselves open to people stealing their time. And it's so crazy, because if you think about it, we spend so much time and money keeping our stuff safe, right? We have home alarms, we have security systems on our cars, we keep our money inside banks behind vaults to keep our stuff safe. But when it comes to our time, oh, what? Donald Trump tweeted? I got to stop right now and give him my time. Kim Kardashian did what? Okay, I got to stop and give her my time. The Patriots did what? Or who did what? Okay, that needs my time. My boss wants this? Okay, he gets my time. My kids want that? They get my time. That is our most precious commodity. That is the one thing that everyone on the face of the earth who is alive today has the exact same amount of. You can always make more money. You can't make more time. And yet we give it out for free to anyone who wants it. That's crazy. And so if you want to become indistractable, if you want to control your time, your attention, and your life, there's a reason we call it paying attention, because it has a cost. It has a value. We need to start treating it as such. So it's not so important. We need to stop fetishizing, wake up at 4 a.m. and take a cold shower. It doesn't matter what you do with your time. It matters that you plan that time and do whatever it is you want to do with that time, and experiment. You say you want to live out your values of taking care of your body. Work out first thing in the morning. If that doesn't work, plan it a little later. You want to experiment week after week with what's the best plan for you for that morning. The idea here, there's no magic bullet, right? People always look for what's the magic technique. There is no magic technique. The magic technique is consistency over intensity in everything you do. That's it. Consistency over intensity. If you consistently look at your week ahead. I meet with so many people who say, oh, look at my vision board. Look at my 5-year plan. Look at my regrets of the dying. And I say to them, look, how about we just start with next week? Okay? How about next week, the next 7 days? Tell me how you want to spend your time so that you can live out your values. Your values to be a good parent. Your values to be a loving spouse. Your values to be a team member for your work colleagues. How will you live out those values in the week ahead? By turning your values into time. Because when you do that, you are reinforcing your identity after every single block of time, that once again, you did what you said you were going to do, as opposed to what most people do. Most people keep to-do lists. To-do lists will screw you up. To-do lists are evil because most people don't know how to use them. Now, some people do know how to use them. The to-do list is a temporary repository of outputs. But of course, for every output, there is an input. But we never think about the inputs, right? We just have this big, long list of to-do lists. If you're anything like I used to be, I would go day after day recycling about 1/3 to 1/2 of all the things on my to-do list from one day to the next to the next. That doesn't work. Why does every guru tell us that the only way to get things done is to keep a to-do list? That's rubbish. It doesn't work. You know why? Because when you go day in and day out without finishing everything on to-do list, you feel like crap. You reinforce to yourself, yet again, you didn't do what you said you're going to do, loser. As opposed to when you keep a time box calendar, you're reinforcing, yep, I did exactly what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction. That becomes the only goal, which is why it's a much better system than keeping a to-do list or having other systems.
I love that. I appreciate you. You touched on some really cool things within that. But I want to just go back to one thing you said. And the reason I asked some of these open-ended questions as far as routines or things like that is the reason there is no one answer. It's no one size fits all. But you said something that was just really key is experiment for you. And I touch on that all the time. And especially with the morning routine, I do a little wrap up at the end of the shows. And what I say a lot of times based on what the guest has said is, maybe think about, tweaking your morning routine to this, or maybe if you can't work out at 5 a.m., maybe you're better off at 5 p.m. And I think what you said is just, it's so important, is experiment what works for you. And the reason we ask a lot of these questions is to make people think about what might work for them. And the reality is, and you touched on it quite a few times today, is nothing is one size fits all, and there's not one magic bullet that works for everybody. So I appreciate you expanding on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think the key is growth over perfection, right? If you can prioritize the need to grow and experiment, you're never going to be done with this, right? Becoming indistractable is never an end destination. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm done being creative." What? Like, it doesn't work that way. It's about constantly improving and growing on the path to getting better at a particular skill. And so it has to be about experimentation and growth, not necessarily perfection.
I think that's so important. It's not about being perfect. And a lot of the times people look at the end result, and the reality is, I'm sure you could agree, it's the journey. It's what you learn throughout the whole experiment of becoming better at fill in the blank.
Yep, exactly.
So for our listeners who want to follow you or find out more about you, or more importantly, get one of your books, what's the best way for them to do so? And are you also active on social media?
I am, yeah. So I love social media. It's great. And so I'm not a technophobe. You can definitely find me on social media. But you can also, the best place to go is to my website. It's nirandfar.com. Nir is spelt like my first name, N-I-R. So that's N-I-R and far.com. If you go to nirandfar.com, there's actually an 80-page workbook that you can download for free. It's complimentary. Anyone can get it. But if you get the book, make sure you keep your order number, okay? Whether you get it on Amazon or you like audiobooks on Audible or even your local bookseller, make sure you keep the order number, because if you go to indistractable.com, you can get a bunch of resources, tools, tactics, all that stuff, all these resources free, along with a video course that's completely complimentary, but you have to enter in that order number. So that's at indistractable.com. It's spelled I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E, so Indistractable.
That's awesome. And then the last question I have for you is, wanted to see if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Yeah, I think the big, if there's one mantra that kind of summarizes the book, it's that the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. That you can't rely on willpower and self-control. Study after study finds that does not work, that willpower and self-control fail in the moment. If the chocolate cake is on the fork on its way to your mouth, you're going to eat it. If the cigarette is lit in your hand, you're going to smoke it. If you sleep next to your cell phone at night, you're going to wake up and reach for it first thing in the morning. They got you. It's too late. You've lost. And so what you have to do is to realize that as good as these distractions are, they are made to distract you. They are made to design your behavior. The antidote is forethought. That we have this amazing gift as human beings, as Homo sapiens. Our species can see into the future better than any other animal on the face of the earth. And so there is no algorithm, no product that we cannot overcome the distraction of that product if we take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. So it's not willpower and self-control you need. You don't have some kind of character flaw. You simply need a system to make sure you don't need willpower and self-control when the time comes.
I love it. I think that's great parting words. And I want to just thank you for all that you shared on our show. And I would definitely recommend our listeners to check out not only your website, but also to get both of your books. So I appreciate you being here today and would love to stay in touch.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 278. I really enjoyed speaking with Nir, especially on the topic of distractions. In today's day and age, it feels like myself, I'm being personally distracted almost every single minute. And I loved how Nir defined success as growth over perfection. I think unfortunately we all chase perfection way too much. The reality is that we all have distractions coming at us from almost every single angle. I know this is something that I'm always looking to improve on or work on myself. So my challenge to you today is just that. Try and focus more on what you need to do and eliminate your distractions. Eliminate those things that you don't have to do. Perhaps it means putting your phone on silence. And if that's not enough, maybe you need to actually take your phone and turn it off for 30 minutes to completely eliminate those distractions. And remember, we rise by lifting others up.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.